Hey everyone, welcome to the second day of my promo week. Today we have Tam Dillon here we are going to be talking about a lot of things that people don't usually discuss when they're in the spiritual community because it's kind of the hard part about being a healer or when you hear, everything's light and love, and there's actually a lot more to it than that. How are you doing, Tam?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks, Heather. Definitely down for this conversation.
Yes, I'm excited. So let's start with talking about the things that nobody tells you during a spiritual awakening. So I know that for me personally, I didn't know anything. I knew absolutely nothing. And this is why I created the program that this challenge is actually all about. It's all the stuff that I wish I had known when I first started going down this journey. And there's so many things and so many perspectives and so many gurus and leaders and healers out there that kind of do things very differently. What's kind of been your experience since you started going down that path?
Sure. Spiritual awakening. Not sunshine and daisies. It's the kind of thing that cracks you open and forces you to take a good hard look at all the things you don't want to have a look at.
Mhm.
It's everything from life altering to terrifying to if we're going to look at the Tarot Tower card, it's a really great example of what spiritual awakening actually looks like.
Yeah.
A lot of people have that perception that when they go through a spiritual transformation or an awakening, it's going to be this blissful, magical experience, and it's not. It's taking you to the deep, dark recesses of hell and back for a lot of those times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Mm.
it's funny when I hear people talk about, like for me, when I first, I had to hit rock bottom. And I hear this with many people where they're like, oh, I hit this really low point in my life. And that was a huge catalyst for transformation for me. And I can personally relate to that. But I do see people who are like, oh, I went to this yoga retreat and I had this, profound experience, or I did this ayahuasca retreat, something. And they go through these experiences, but they don't take the time to integrate the information and actually take it to the next level. So it's like this surface thing, and they're like, oh, this is so amazing. This is so great. I've learned so many things about myself, but they aren't really taking the time to go in and do that deep dive and really figure out, more about themselves at a soul level, doing the inner work, figuring out how to heal their wounds, things like that. And I think people are expecting that. You see the memes of light and love and stuff like that, but they don't really talk about all the rest of it.
100%. And a lot of people have that misconception that they can just go do a weekend retreat or, Mama Aya is gonna, give me all the answers and fix all my problems miraculously. And it's not. Um, I mean, ayahuasca is one of those medicines that should not be taken lightly. I mean, it's not one that I'm down to go and take because I know she'll probably haul me over the coals. I'm not down for that experience just yet. And you do get amazing plant medicine experiences. I know a lot of people that have really mind-blowing experiences with plant medicine, but it's like you said, the integration side of it is so important, and a lot of people miss that step when they're on the journey of self-awareness, delving into the spiritual realms, doing spiritual awakening, transformation. They're constantly chasing the aha moments, the
Mhm.
blissful moments, we have these amazing revelations. You're like, oh, I get it now, I understand everything. And people chase those,
Mhm.
but then when life glares them in the face and says, hey, now you got to integrate, now you got to deal with your shit, and they're like, oh no, let's go do more ayahuasca.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So before we move on, I want to ask the people who are watching either right now or in the replay, if your spiritual awakening has been harder than anyone ever told you that it would be, or even if you're a healer, because I know a lot of us that communicate with each other are in similar modalities. If you're a healer and you're terrible at healing yourself, but you always put everyone else first, there's no judgment. But I mean, we're all in the same boat. We're all guilty of it. But put your stories and your experiences in the comments. Even if you're watching the replay, I'll come back and try to answer questions and talk to you guys about the things that you've gone through. But I want to say that the ayahuasca retreats and plant medicines are dear to my heart. I do mushrooms pretty often. I've done some of the other things. I haven't done ayahuasca yet, but I think it's more just of a, it's not readily accessible where I'm at. And it really helps with a brain reset for me. I do it, I don't do it all the time. I do it every now and then, but it's like when I feel myself starting to get into the like really deep in the 3D and like forgetting about some of that more spiritual stuff that is, you know, ingrained in you that you sometimes lose it a little bit when you're living your day-to-day life. And so I'm like, okay, I'm starting to feel myself get a little depressed now. Like, let's go do something. And it does give you that aha moment most of the time if you're in the right, you know, setting with the right people with the right intentions. But I think a lot of people use it as an excuse to find those aha moments, but then they're when they come back and they're like, okay, let's have another one, they're having the same aha moments over and over again because they're not really diving deep and figuring out what that aha moment actually means. And I tell people a lot, like there's a difference between knowing a concept and feeling a concept. So you can learn something and have the aha moment, but you have to truly learn how to embody it and make it part of your everyday life and who you are before you can really go to that next level.
Absolutely. And then you put that so perfectly. I mean, firstly, that they make a wonderful reset. I've been in amongst many people that have done incredible mushroom journeys and ceremonies. I've done my own. I mean, mushrooms is a wonderful medicine. It's definitely one of the more gentler ones that are out there. And I've heard a lot of people explain it as a reset. Um, but they do the work in between the resets. So when they're going for a reset, the resetting is a different type of reset. They're not chasing that same, aha moment or, the wonderful visions and things that they were shown. They're not chasing that consistently because they've worked through that. They've integrated that. They've done that work. And they're now moving into the next layer. Humans as good old Shrek says we're like onions, we're no different. We're onions like ogres are. And you got to peel back the layers and you got to do the aha moments and the integration between those layers, before you even get close to the core of it. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that kind of routine of just constantly chasing those resets. The medicine's going to fix me.
Mhm.
It's like going to your doctor and getting a prescription. You're treating the symptoms, you're not treating the root. And
Right.
people don't want to look at the roots. They just want to treat the symptoms. They don't want to feel this way. They don't want to be unhappy or depressed or, and medicine gives them that reset for 6 months and they're like, oh, I feel great now. And then life starts to do life. It's because they're not integrating in between. They're not getting down to the root of why do I have those symptoms in the first place? Like, where is that coming from? And that is the main point of having a spiritual awakening.
Mhm.
Dig down into the roots and understand yourself. That's you're awakening to yourself and
Mhm.
spiritual awakening. It's not awakening to the divine or awakening to God. Yes, there's unity with those with source, and that's definitely a part of it. But the biggest thing is awakening to yourself and coming back to yourself and coming to the root of things.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Truly remembering who you are at a soul level, why you're here, why you're even having this human experience in the first place. What does that mean? How can I, put my best foot forward and really get all that I can out of that? And, I think that with the spiritual awakening, the the hardest part is that when I first started, there was really nobody else going through this. And there was so many different things that I was learning as I was doing my research, so many like there was a lot of false information, but there was also there was a lot of conflicting things with what healers and teachers were saying. But at the basis, the core aspect of everything, there was a lot of similarity. So there is a lot of connection between what people are experiencing and what they're going through, because I had a lot of doubt in the beginning. I was like, is this real? Am I going crazy? Like, what is this? But there's so many people who are having similar experiences that didn't know each other, so many books that were explaining the same thing, that it's like I have to, like, just even as a scientific minded person, the probability alone, like, what are the chances that everyone's having the same crazy, hallucinations at the same time? That didn't make sense to me. So I think that when you're looking into different things like being an empath or plant medicine or whatever kind of healing modalities to really get into the root of who you are and your healing process. Like I specialize in inner child healing, and it amazes me how many people don't want to go that route because they're afraid of looking at their own wounds, their own trauma. And that's really part of the journey that nobody really prepares you for, because you're like, oh, I can go do all these things and it'll take that surface layer off, but you have to really go down and face your demons, do the shadow work, and people don't really prepare you for that at all.
Mm-mm. No, they don't. And new age spirituality, which is vastly different to traditional spirituality. So traditional spirituality we've had since the dawn of humanity. We've always sought connection with source, we've sought connection with ourselves, and we were a lot more rooted within who we were. We didn't have this huge disconnect that we have now. We're coming into probably around the 60s and the 70s, especially we had that surge of a lot of gurus coming over from the East. Yoga started to expand, and the colonized version of yoga, not the true version of yoga, and the colonized version of a lot of ancient spiritual practices. Those were now brought in and sold as new age modalities, which has done a huge disservice and a massive disruption to the spiritual communities. And for a lot of practitioners, they're coming to these modalities because they want to make the world better, or they've been on an ayahuasca retreat, or they've had this awakening and they think that they've fixed themselves and they now want to do this for everybody else. But they've done one retreat, they've done one certification, and they've done it within the realms of that new aged colonized version of it, not the true traditional training. If you go and train with a traditional healer, you're gone for months, sometimes years, and you're stripped of everything, your clothes, your possessions, your families, the works. And you go and you chop wood and you carry water,
Mhm.
because that's a big part of the new age spiritual movement, is that we're missing that component of you still got to come back to real life. You still got to come back to chop wood and carry water. You got to do day-to-day life. You got to function as a normal human being in society. And New Age spirituality says you don't have to do that. You can just go and live off in the ether and eat your mushrooms and drink your ayahuasca and work with your crystals and your cards and everything's going to be hunky-dory, and it's not.
Mm-mm.
And then we have things like spiritual psychosis that then come in and people get stuck up there in the ether. If you're doing this work, especially as a practitioner, you've got to keep one foot on the ground. You've got to be rooted in two different worlds. Yes, you work with the spirit realm, you work with the ancestors, you work with all these plants and things, but you're working here in the 3D world. You've got to be rooted here in the 3D world. You've got to keep that balance. And that's where New Age spirituality is selling a lie. The love and lights and the unicorns and the daisies. And hey, you don't have to live real life. You can just live here in the spirit realm and everything's going to be fine.
Right.
And it's not. You got
Yeah.
to chop wood and carry water at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's why um, a lot of the Western practitioners, they're struggling. They're struggling to be sustainable. They're struggling to build systems and practices, and they're struggling to keep their head about them and then hold consistent space for the people because they're not taught the day-to-day things. You get up as an apprentice and you're up before everybody else. You're making the fire, you're boiling the water, you're getting out and doing all the hard labor. It's not a walk in the park, and it's definitely not a weekend retreat in Bali.
No, yeah. And I think that was one of the hardest parts for me as well, was when I first started going through like the serious, like my channeling coming online and wanting to meditate and be like with the spirit world all the time, and then having to come back and be like, okay, well, I still have to pay my rent. I still have to, you know, call my nieces on the weekend. I still have to do all these things. And that's why grounding is so important. But I didn't want to do all that stuff anymore. Like the spirit world is so exciting and so, much more fun. And there's so much more going on, especially with all the things that are happening in the world right now. It's really hard to come back from that. So finding that balance between, meditating and talking to your spirit guides and visiting the Akashic records and all of these things, it's hard to even just switch your brain from that mentality to being like, okay, well, now I have to go pay bills, I have to go to work, I have to go deal with the kids or whatever it may be. That's really difficult to learn how to manage both.
Mm. It is. It definitely is, and that's why we've got to move away from the New Age spirituality and go back to traditional spirituality. How is it actually done? Because they teach you how to do that. They teach you how to maintain that balance.
Mhm.
For me, because I stepped onto the spiritual path at such a young age. I mean, I was 14 and cracking open my first books on magic and witchcraft and what is this wonderful world. I had my older brother as a mentor to kind of walk the path with me, and it was exciting, it was amazing, it was incredible, but I still got up and I went to school. I had my routines, I had structure, and I think starting it at a younger age allowed me to have that process of integration. um, and I was, kind of like at the dawn of the internet as well. So there wasn't so much information online. You didn't have this oversaturation of misinformation. You didn't have this huge Instagram culture of, look at how perfectly positioned I am in my pose and look at my huge, amazing crystals. I mean, a tiny piece of quartz could probably do 10 times what a giant piece of quartz could do for you. But there's that constant pseudo spiritual side that comes up that says, oh, you can just live in this world, you can just exist in this world, and you've got to find that balance. And having routines and rituals and structure, it's bringing all of those things together and merging the two of them. And it's a practice. It does take practice, and it takes willingness to have that practice,
Mhm.
because it is easy to want to just escape, you
Mhm.
know, let me not think about paying my bills, especially with the way that the
Nice.
world is.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it also then speaks to the thing of what we were saying earlier, where, we've got to go back to the root of who we are, and we've got to look at our layers, and we've got to look at ourselves. And people don't want to look at their own atrocities, never mind the atrocities of the world. So we use these things as an escape. You're not going for a yoga retreat because you want to connect with source, or you want to really get into the deep dark recesses of yourself or do some work. You're going there to escape.
Mhm.
You're going there to feel good. You're going there to avoid the world as it is. And that is not spiritual. That's not spirituality at all. Spirituality is looking at the real and the raw stuff.
Right. Absolutely. I'm going to ask another question for anybody who's watching or listening to this later in the comments or the chat. What's one thing about your awakening that you wish someone had warned you about? Go ahead and put that in there so we can talk about it. And what you were saying kind of brings us into our next topic, which is about spiritual bypassing. I feel like a lot of people, especially the light and love part of the community, are really selling this whole spiritual bypassing concept. Can you explain what that means in a way? Because maybe there's some people who don't understand what spiritual bypassing is.
So spiritual bypassing is when we use spirituality as a means to avoid real life. So a really simple example is um, you land up in a really horrific car accident and you land up disabled, and you go and see this practitioner to understand why, and what does this whole experience have to teach me, and they say it's part of your destiny. It's there to shift you into a new version of yourself. It's a gift from the universe, or this was fated. This was something that you had to go through. And that's using spirituality as a way to excuse something that was probably a really horrific experience for another person. So it's using spirituality as an excuse, or using spirituality as a way to avoid the real things in life, like paying your bills. I can sit here in alignment and find all my clients. No, I can't. I've got to get online. I've got to build my business. I've got to have structure. That's spiritual bypassing as a practitioner. The whole misconception that we can just be miraculously in alignment and the clients are just going to arrive at our door. They don't know you exist. They don't even know where your front door is to come and knock on it. That's spiritual bypassing. And it's actually a deep source of frustration for me when I see those ads pop up on social media that say, I work 8 hours a day and I'm earning 20 grand a month. I don't think so. Like I can smell the bullshit from here. That is spiritual bypassing. And also you're now reinforcing a lie that desperate practitioners that are desperate to pay their bills by doing the work that they really want to do. And they think, well, this person's working 8 hours a day and they're earning 20K a month. I want to do that as well. Wow, all I need to be is just aligned. How do I find that alignment? No, none of that is real. None of that is based in common sense or reality. That's a very big form of spiritual bypassing in the practitioner community specifically. So it really is, it's using spirituality as an excuse for normal functioning everyday life.
Hmm. Yeah. And
Mm,
being in alignment is important, but it only is important as so far as that things that are meant to find you, things that opportunities will happen a little easier, but you still have to put in the work. You still have to meet the universe halfway. And it irks me when people
mhm,
are like, "Oh, well, the universe works in mysterious ways." I'm like, "Well, duh, I know that. But why did this happen to me?" And I say that in jest. It's and because I truly believe that the universe is happening for you, not to you. But that's the thing, like you
mm,
have to go and be like, okay, well, why? What is this trying to teach me? It's not, oh, this is your destiny. Oh, the universe. Well, okay, so there are some instances where this is an experience that you chose on your life path that you wanted to have and to go through, but there's usually more to it than that, like the car accident, for example. Okay, well, maybe this car wasn't meant for you and you were doing too much, you were being too busy, you were not giving yourself time to rest, you're not grounding, so now we're gonna break a bone, so you have to take time off work and you don't have a choice, you have to put yourself in that resting period and really reflect and
mm.
think. So there's always more than one reason for everything that happens, but everything truly does happen for a reason. And it's really getting down to the bare bones about, okay, well, what is this trying to teach me? What lesson am I supposed to be learning? What opportunity of growth do I have after having this experience? Because people are like, oh, when it rains, it pours, like all these negative things are happening. I'm like, okay, well, just as they say, you have to get rid of the old to make room for the new. There's something better coming along for you, but you have to make space for it too. So there's so many different ways to look at one specific experience that can really decide on whether you're bypassing or not, or you're truly getting the full experience and the lesson out of that so that it doesn't keep repeating itself, because some of us are a little more stubborn than others, me included. So it really comes down to like trying to get the full point of why that happened to you rather than just being like, oh, the universe just doesn't like me today or whatever.
Yeah, blaming the universe for your problems. Yeah. Yeah, the ancestors have it out for me. And in my years of reading tarot professionally, I saw that a lot. I mean, I know that when people get called to the path of being a shaman or a healer or a medicine person, and they're not listening, that the ancestors will eventually start kicking their butt and being like, look, dude, you need to step
Absolutely.
on your path and do your work and fulfill your purpose.
Hmm.
But people would come to me in the midst of complete meltdowns or chaos and be like, why does the universe hate me? Why have my ancestors turned their back on me? Why is life happening to me? And it's like, well, what else is going on? Let's look at the whole picture here,
Right.
not just the viewpoint that you're stuck in. Um, yeah, and people get stuck there in that's a great example of spiritual bypassing where you're just blaming the universe for your problems, and it's like, are you actively being part of the problem? Problems don't just arrive at your doorstep. There is reasons for it, like you say, and there's usually more than one reason for it. Repeated patterns, repeated cycles, what's going on in the mind and the emotional bodies. What processes are you repeating there? Because it is what we're putting out, we're gonna track back in. And if we're not self-aware of ourselves and what's going on across our different bodies, you were gonna think that life is just happening to us,
Mhm.
and or we're just gonna sit around and wait for life to happen for us. The twin flame's gonna come and knock on my door. No, you got to get out and date. I'm gonna win the lottery. Cool. Have you bought yourself a ticket?
Right.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's funny because there's a friend of mine who is always posting on social media like, oh my gosh, I can't find love. Like I don't get as much love, back that I put out into the universe. And I'm like, well, of course not, not with that attitude. Like the things that you say, the things that you think, especially on repeat, really are the like the what is you're going to attract from the universe. So if you keep thinking negatively, if you keep saying these self-deprecating things, then yeah, of course you're going to get more of that because that's what you're creating with your words, your actions, your thoughts. So really having that mindset shift and looking at things from a very different perspective and being like, okay, well, what do I want to attract? And there's this girl that I follow on Facebook and she talks about gaslighting herself into manifesting. And I think it's a funny way to say it, but really it is like you have to whatever you want in life, you have to act like you already have it. And I say that with a slight caveat because I was trying to attract abundance and I was spending money like I still had it. And that's not something that I would recommend, quite that extreme. But you really have to, in your mind at least, and in your emotions and that kind of layer of your energetic body, you have to really act like it's already at your doorstep. It's already on its way because you're really just blocking yourself by saying all of these things that don't match what you're trying to align with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the Russian nesting dolls are my best for explaining that exactly. Joe Dispenza's book, The Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, he portrays that quite well. When you're trying to manifest something, you've got to be like it's there already and it exists. You've got to feel it in the physical body. You've got to feel it in the energetic body, the mind, the emotions, the intuitive self. All of them have to be in alignment. And if you think of the Russian nesting doll, the pieces are a little bit offset to one another, you're not in alignment. You've got to literally pull all the pieces in and they're all facing the same direction. They're like, this is where we're going. This is the trajectory that we're on.
Mhm.
And yeah, you can manifest some amazing stuff for yourself. I've done it. I've seen people do it. I've seen people manifest outright miracles. I mean, hey, let's look at Jesus. He was a great example of that.
Absolutely.
But it really is. It's a lot to do with how you're viewing it. If you're just you're writing the thing down and burning your candle and sending it off into the wind, but you're not feeling it in your body and you're not seeing it in your mind and you're not living like it's already there.
Mhm.
You're just gonna run and spin your wheels and just go nowhere. You've got to have proper alignment.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It's amazing because I was trying to shift from clocking into someone else's clock every day and becoming my own boss and being a business owner. And I was dealing with I deal with seasonal depression. I moved across the country last year on a whim. Thank you, universe. I was told to move. I did. I came here with literally nothing. I had no job. I had a place to stay, but I was basically starting over for like the 300th time in this lifetime. But when I truly started to be like, okay, well, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be as a business owner? Who do I want to be as a healer? And I really had to like get out of that mindset of that depression of that I'm lonely here. I don't know anyone. I'm miserable at my job. Like I had to force myself to get out of bed every day and to start making moves as that person I wanted to be and step into that role. And it took a little time because it was very difficult for me dealing with so many other challenges that I was basically, my life was being torn down to be rebuilt back up again. And
Mm.
so dealing with all of that mentally, emotionally, and physically was very difficult while still trying to build a business, while still trying to make sure that I get out of bed every day and to go do the things and to water my plants and to just all of it. It's very difficult. But once I truly started stepping into that role and stepping into that power and calling my power back and being like, I can do this, so many things started changing. And it's amazing how being in alignment and truly embodying those things that you want to attract makes such a difference.
Mm, it really does. And it's We talk a lot about flow space in the spiritual communities and as practitioners, and unless you've actually been in true flow space, you don't really know what it is. I mean, I've been there a couple of times, and it's taken work to get there. I didn't just arrive there magically one day. Didn't take a magic mushroom or anything to get there either. I did the work. And I'd manifested myself all the way from my home country to Vietnam. I'd never left my home country before. My bank account was like, "You want to go where?
Right.
How do you think you're gonna do that?"
Right.
And I did it. I followed. Um, I've got a really great friend, and I do see him as a bit of a spiritual mentor as well. He calls it the cookie trail. So when we're manifesting and we're looking to stay within flow space, we follow that kind of cookie trail that the universe constantly leads for us. And they're like, you need to go speak to this person. You need to have this conversation over here. You need to go into this store at this day at this time.
Yep.
And you've got to be in flow with yourself first, in flow with your intuition first. That's when you can step into flow with the universe and hear the universe. And they're like, okay, cool, this is where you're going to go and this is what you're going to do. And I just had so much faith and knowing that I was going to get on a plane in a couple of weeks' time, and Vietnam was where I was going to land up. And true's nuts, despite what my bank account was telling me, that's what happened.
Hmm.
Because I listened and I let myself sit in that flow space. And it's incredibly terrifying. Um, it's literally full on surrender to the universe and saying, hey, I trust you. I trust that you've got me. I trust that you've got my best interests at heart, because I know I've got my best interests at heart. And I know that this is the right thing for me. And I'm going to flow with that. That's what flow space looks like. And it's amazing once you're in there, but it
Hmm.
takes work to stay there. And you've got to keep doing the work and showing up inside that work to stay there. We get in the flow space and we get to the places where we want to go and we're like, cool, I've arrived. And then we stop doing the work and we step out the flow and we step out of ourselves and we start the cycles all over again.
Yeah. And this is one thing
Mm.
that I try to teach people when I'm teaching about manifestation is that you have to go into what you want without expectation, because you have to meet the universe halfway. One thing about dealing with spirituality, I hate paradoxes. I have a really hard time with them mentally, and that's all it is paradox after paradox. But when you're manifesting, you have to be specific about what you want, but not so specific in a way that you can give the universe space to make it happen. So, like when you're trying, let's say you're trying to manifest money, you can be like, okay, I want to win the lottery. I want to win $1 million by this such and such a date. Well, that's not going to happen, most likely.
Yeah.
You have to be like, I need, you can give an X amount if you want, but you don't have to. Be like, I have to take care of this. It's important for my path, and leave it open to let the universe find a way for it to come to you. And so following those that cookie trail like you're talking about, you have to be self-aware, and you also have to have your mind open and your energy open to these opportunities that are going to come across your path, and be like, oh, maybe it's a word that resonates with you, or a feeling that you get, or something that just feels right, and it's like, oh, this must be what they meant. And it always looks completely different than what you're expecting. So being open for those doorways, those opportunities to cross your path, and being like, okay, I'm not going to ignore this Facebook message because I'm really busy, like I might have 6 months ago. I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to take the time and I'm going to open that door and walk through it, and really take the time to follow those little pieces and to get to where it is that you need to be, because that manifestation might not come in one fell swoop. There might be a couple steps that you need to take in order for it to happen. So it's interesting to see how all the things play and fall together. One of the things about the divine tapestry and divine timing that has always fascinated me is like there's an aspect of the universe that not controls, but allows for people to cross their paths just so that 3 people later you get something that you need, or you run into some random stranger in the coffee shop and drop your keys and they pick them up, and it's like, oh, this is someone who can teach me something. Like, just, but for billions and billions of people all at the same time, it blows my mind every time I think about it. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, the collective. The collective is quite something to like step back and witness the beauty and the magic of the collective, because there's between 7 and 8 billion of us coexisting all at the same time right now.
Mhm.
And when we allow ourselves to not get caught up in the how, and we allow the collective to step in and give us the how. The collective's going to come in and say, this is how you're going to get there. I'm going to show you how to get there. I'm going to give you what you need to get there. We start to really witness this, like you say, that broader tapestry of how we are all very connected. And it really is, it's one of the more beautiful parts of the spiritual experience for me has been witnessing that collective and how the collective functions, because it's like one big giant web, and cause and effect. You and I having this conversation, it could end up being somebody's how, because they're listening to something, they're like, I needed to hear that. That
Mhm.
made so much sense. This is gonna set me on the path where I need to go. I now need to go and have this conversation with Heather, and I need to go and do her program next week.
Before we move on to the next topic, I want to ask another question for you guys. Have you ever caught yourself spiritually bypassing something, saying it's all love and light, or something along those lines, but you were really just avoiding something that you really needed to face, something that the universe was trying to bring up that needed healed, or something that had to be taken care of before you could move on to the next step of your journey? So next I want to move into the healing space and talk about healers, because we both are healers, and there's something about, especially with like witch wounds and mother wounds, father wounds, things like that, that we have to work through, because a lot of us tend to put everyone else before us. And
Mm.
we hold space for everyone else, but we don't always give ourselves the time, the love, and the care that we need to be able to fill from that full cup to take care of other people.
Oh yes. We've had this discussion inside Critical Mass. Actually, we did a whole episode on the practitioner wound, because the practitioner wound, the medicine person, the witch wound, they're all very much one and the same thing. Um, and here we're going thousands of years back into history, and we're looking at the ramifications of the Christian church and colonization, and how it's disrupted spiritual practices and spiritual traditions. And it's demonized those things, it's criminalized those things. So we still feel the ramifications of that. So that's where things like imposter syndrome come from. Am I allowed to charge for my services? Am I any good at my services? Am I allowed to be a medicine person? Am I allowed to be a shaman? We ask all of these questions because for thousands of years, society has said, no, you can't. That's wrong. That's evil. That's against the law. You're going to land up in jail. You're going to be burnt at the stake. You're going to be, you're going to have all these horrific things done to you. So when we're talking about those wounds, we've got to look at it on a much bigger scale. And we've got to look at our history to understand where do those wounds originally come from, because they weren't there 10,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago. They're here in recent history. So if we go back to the Council of Nicaea, where Constantine pretty much gave that equal rule of your church and state, there's no separation. Whatever the church says now goes. These can now be laws. Let's rewrite the Bible to suit the narrative. And that's continued throughout. And that form of control has really done like a huge, huge dirty to current day practitioners. And a lot of them don't realize and understand why they feel a certain way about their work. When people want to work with something like tarot cards, for example, and they feel that really deep pull towards like working with the cards and wanting to lean into these different tools, but I'm going to burn in the deep, dark depths of hell if I do that.
Mhm.
Tarot didn't exist in the Bible. Tarot is a new tool, it's a new modality. And I mean, if you really want to look at the Bible, there's incredible people that were prophets, people that did perform miracles, people that raised people from the dead and practice things like Reiki and hands-on healing. So it's all that miswritten history that reinforces those wounds. And we've got to know our history so that we can work through those wounds and know that we're working through centuries of wounds. And there's also individual ancestral line as well. What wounds have you got in your ancestral line? Perhaps if you've got a deep calling and you know that you're here for that bigger purpose, you're here to be a medicine person or practitioner or shaman, and likely your grandmother was a medicine person, your great grandmother was a medicine person, and so you follow the line back like that. What experiences that they have, because we carry that inside our DNA. There's great scientific research around that on, the experiences that your grandfather went to World War II and stuck in the trenches. We carry some of that trauma in our bloodline. We carry that in our DNA. Your great 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 grandmother was burnt at the stake for being a witch. You carry that in your DNA. So you've got to look at the global impact of it as a practitioner, and you've got to look at your own ancestry as a practitioner as well. Hmm.
Yeah, I think that part of my purpose of being here is to be a generational curse breaker. So I have done a lot of healing. There was a lot of women in my ancestral line who um, were, oppressed, and their voices were silenced, and they weren't allowed to, have jobs and all of these things. And there was a lot of stuff about sexual abuse in a lot of my history on both sides of my family. And going back and doing, because it's not only carried in the DNA, but also there's that repeated behavior as well. So, like, I went through a lot of that stuff. So, when I went back and did my own healing for that stuff, I was able through meditation to actually send the ripples of that healing back through time and help heal that for the past generations and for future generations, because time is not linear, right? So, everything's happening all at the same time. So,
Mm.
being able to heal that really helps boost your power and be able to kind of get rid of those deep seated traumas that maybe have nothing to do with what you've experienced in this lifetime. Maybe it does, but having that in your DNA and in the family line really does make an impact and can affect how you do anything, really, how you manifest, how you heal, how you are affected by things. I was buried alive in a past life. I've brought this up many times. And in this lifetime, I was afraid of the dark. I was very claustrophobic. I didn't like the pillow touching my nose when I was sleeping. And when I went through a QHHT session and went back and actually healed that lifetime, almost immediately, I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I could sit with my back to a door in a restaurant. I just smash my face in the pillow now. So it's amazing how the energy of these experiences through past lives, through, your ancestors, really do affect the things that you experience now.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I highly recommend doing past life regressions, and QHHT is a really great modality for that. I mean, I've had it for many years. I've had this animosity towards the universe, this kind of love hate relationship where it's like, why did you bring me back here? Like, what am I here for? Like, I felt like I was done a dirty for being in this lifetime, and I blamed the universe. And I didn't never understood why until I did my past life regression, and she took me into my life between lives. And I was there in front of what I can only call the council and arguing with them. So being argumentative is one of my soul traits. I know this now. And they were insistent, like, you've got to come back. There's things that you need to do in this lifetime. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then whoop, I was back in the room and I was like, oh man, I'm going to do this cycle all over again. Like, why?
Yeah.
But having that understanding, I was like, okay, cool. Now I know why I'm grumpy with the universe some days, because from what I understand, I wasn't supposed to come back around for another loop. I was supposed to be done. And they were like, look, humanity's not doing very well down there. Like, we need you. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll retire in my next lifetime then. I'm here, humanity. I'm here for your benefits.
Tell me what I need
But
to
I
do.
do those sessions.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's amazing the different things that pop up too in those kind of past life regressions and hearing these stories. I know I've done a few, and I've even in meditation, I've met some of my galactic family. I know I have a concurrent lifetime right now in Lyra. I was part of the Orion Wars, and hearing, because we have the great forgetting when we get here, right? So we don't remember these things, but hearing the stories, and I'm like, okay, deep in my bones, I know this is true. it sounds true, it feels true. I don't remember it. Like I don't have the memories like replaying in my mind, but it's interesting to hear like other people's stories, but also finding out more about yourself and being like, wow, I did that. That's crazy. Wow, this happened to me. Like I was a ruler in Egypt in a past life, and me and my husband, we weren't very good and we were very greedy and we were stabbed like Julius Caesar style. And having, knowing that, like how different that lifetime is to who I am today, um, really is like, wow, I'm apparently capable of that. Like that just blows my mind. So learning about these things and these experiences that you've gone through kind of they give you a heads up on things that need to be healed, obviously, but just knowing that, these are life experiences that you have under your belt at that soul growth level is just, I don't know, it's fascinating to me to hear like, oh, I saved all these people in Orion and I was voted into the High Council and like all these things. And I'm like, wow, I'm really proud of myself. All right, cool. So it kind of goes both ways there.
It does, and that's why I say it really is a great modality. Like it's worth going to do a couple of sessions, and there's some wonderful practitioners out there that I know personally that I would highly recommend for a QHHT session or a past life regression. Because it is worth knowing and understanding not just your ancestry, not just our global history, but also understanding your own history. You possibly keep having recurring nightmares. For me, I have a recurring nightmare of being in what I think is World War II, and bombs are dropping, and I'm like, oh, what is happening? Is that one of my past lives, or is that, something ingrained in my DNA from my grandfather from, when he was in the war? And I wouldn't know unless I actually went and did a past life regression and I worked with that.
Mhm.
Um, and as a practitioner, you've got to know the whole self, and that includes the past lives.
Right.
Why have you got these patterns or these wounds or these struggles? Monetary struggles is a common one. Past life, or is it just a family thing, generational thing that you got to break? And you won't know until you dig around in there. Work with someone to help you do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
It's very important. And not just for healers, but for everyone, I think. I think people should, and I'm hoping that this changes in the future, but I'm really hoping that people actually start to take an interest in, accepting that past lives are a real thing, first of all, but really diving into that because there's so much out there. The cosmos is so big and just the possibilities are literally endless. I had a past life where me and my partner were molecules of air to see if we could stay together. Like it really is truly beautiful and really interesting to learn about yourself. So, so I'm going to ask one more question before we wrap up. After everything that we talked about, what's one thing that you are going to stop bypassing and actually face this week after hearing this chat? Go ahead and put that in the chat or the comments. Um, Tam, I had an absolute pleasure talking with you today. Do you want to kind of let people know how they can find you if they want to speak with you further after this?
Yeah, so I'm on most social networks, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find me under Tam Dillon. Facebook, there's Tam Dillon Mentoring. Instagram and YouTube, it's Tam Dillon Official. And then on my website, tamdillon.com, I work with practitioners specifically, and then I'm available for readings as well.
Awesome.